What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm going to go over the basics of React Router. Now, if you don't know what React Router is, it's a tool that allows us to make our React app operate more like a traditional website or a multi-page app would. And so I'm going to start off by going over the basic concepts of URLs and talking about what's the difference between a React app versus a typical website. We can then move on to playing around with React routes, and I'll make sure to provide plenty of examples so that you guys can really learn how they work. And I'll even show you guys how to make a protected route. And then lastly, we'll wrap up by taking a look at how the history API works in a normal website versus a React app. And so I think I got, roughly about 2 hours of content. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. If you have any questions or if you want me to cover any other topics, just let me know and I'll be happy to do so. In this section, we're going to start talking about React Router. And this is probably going to be one of my favorite sections because once we add React Router into our repertoire of tools, you'll find that our applications moving forward that we build in this course are going to be exponentially more complex and significantly more interesting. But there are a few things that we have to cover before we can actually start working with React Router, and we have to really start understanding what URLs are. We have to take a look at what happens on the back end when we actually click different links within a website and navigate to different URLs within a domain. So I built out this simple diagram to help you guys understand what are the different components that make up a URL. And so the first thing that you're going to see is the protocol. So HTTPS is the protocol here. There's two main protocols. We have HTTP and HTTPS. The only difference between the two being HTTPS is secure and HTTP isn't. And you'll see that most websites, if you go to them, they probably only run HTTPS. So if you try to go to a website that says using HTTP, usually it'll just redirect you to HTTPS. Then after the protocol, we have the domain. And this is the domain or the IP. And here I just wrote localhost because that's usually what we see when we're testing our React application on our local development server. But if you go to an actual website like Amazon or Google, you're usually going to a domain name, right? And so they actually have to purchase a domain name. And so we use that domain name to basically route our HTTP request to their server. And so this can be a domain name, like google.com or amazon.com, or it can be an IP address because you can actually point directly to the IP addresses of their server. But you'll find that, because no one really remembers the IP addresses of the different web servers, it's much easier to use domain names. So usually what you guys are familiar with are going to be domain names. Then we have after the domain name, we have a colon, and then we have the port number. And when you visit websites, you usually won't see the port number because by default, our web browsers will always use port 443 for HTTPS and port 80 for HTTP. But when we're working on our local development server, we always use port 3000. So I just wanted to point out where that is and why that is there. All right. And then finally, from the slash, moving forward, we have the route. And the route essentially will take us to different web pages within that website. So let's go and take a look at a real world scenario, right? And so I've got this blog. Let me zoom in for you guys. And it's called The Woks of Life. The only reason I know about this was I was trying to learn how to cook Chinese food the other day. I tried to make a recipe from here and it came out like absolute garbage. And I realized I could just spend $7 at China King Buffet and eat my brains out. So I was like, you know what? Why am I chopping up onions like some loser? But I do like the name The Woks of Life. It's pretty clever, right? Because you got a walk and then you got the Woks of Life. So it's a little play on words. But here you can see that, let's take a look at the URL. So if you double click on the URL, it's going to give us the full URL. So here we're using HTTPS. So this is going to be secure traffic. And we got colon //. Then we got the domain name, which is thewoksoflife.com. So whoever runs this blog purchased this domain. And this domain is going to be associated with some IP address of their web server that's located who knows where. And basically, when we go to this domain name, we're going to the /URL, right? So if I type in / and hit enter, it takes me to the same page. So what happens is this goes and sends a request to their server. And the server, when it sees a route of /URL, basically is going to respond back with an HTML page that's going to represent their home page. Okay. But if we select the about link, you'll see that the URL changes to /about/, right? And so the server, when I sent a request to the /about path or route, it responded back with this HTML page, which looks significantly different, right? And then if I hit recipes and then hit, visual recipe index, you can see that this is a different route and I get a completely separate page. So this is what's referred to as a multi-page app, where the server that's hosting this website basically has a whole bunch of different HTML files. And each HTML file is going to represent a different page on this website. The way that the web server determines what HTML file to send to us, the user, is based off of this route, right? So if we send visual recipe dash index, it's going to be configured to send the HTML file associated with this link. And you can see that if we go to how to and hit all posts, you can see that the route changes and now we have a slash category, slash cooking methods. And so there's a ton of different routes on this website. And the reason I want to go over this is because React works a little bit differently. React is what's referred to as a single page app. So what happens is, and I'm going to cover this all in the next video. I just want to make this video so that you guys had a slight intro into URLs and routing. But React always just sends the same index.html file. And so we have to use a special package like React Router to make it operate more like a traditional website or a traditional multi-page application. All right. So hopefully you guys have a better understanding of URLs and how routing works. In the next video, I'm going to explain how React Router actually allows us to kind of transform a React application into a multi-page application while still maintaining single-page application functionality. Hey guys, in this video, I've set up a few diagrams for us to take a look at so that we can better understand how a traditional website operates when it comes to navigating to different routes and how a web server will handle these different routes. And then after that, we'll then take a look at how React will handle this because it will be a little different. But once you see how it works, you'll see that it's pretty simple. So in this diagram, we've got a web browser. So this is going to be the user side. And then we've got a web server on the right side. And this web server is going to host the web application. And so when the user navigates to the route of /home, what's going to happen is we're going to send a GET request to the server. And the server, he's got a ton of HTML files, right? So he's going to have one for the home page. He's going to have one for the about page. And he's going to have one for the contacts page, as well as any other pages within the application. And the server has a mapping of, what route maps to what HTML file. So when he sees a route of /home, he knows that he needs to send the home.html file. So then the server responds back with a response, and he sends the home.html file, and then the user loads that onto the screen, and then he sees all the contents of the home page. Now, if the user navigates to the /about route, what's going to happen is we're going to send the request just like we did before. The server will see that we got a route of /about, and he knows that he needs to send it to send the about.html file back to the user. So then the user receives the about.html file, loads it onto the screen, and then we see the contents of the about page. And this is going to be the same for all the other pages. The server just keeps the main idea behind a traditional website or a multi-page application is that there's a different HTML file for each route. Now in React, this is going to be a little bit different. And what I want to do is I want to show you guys the previous project that we were working on, which I think was the expense tracker. And I want to show you the public folder. So this is the folder that we're going to be hosting on a web server. And so we've only got one HTML file in our entire application. We've got this index.html. And if we scroll through the rest of the files, you'll see that they're all JavaScript files or components. And there's no other HTML file. So when we host a React application, the web server can only ever send this index.html file. That's really how a React application works. And then once the HTML file gets loaded, the JavaScript can then take over and then load our content dynamically. If we take a look at this diagram, what's going to happen is, let's say we navigate to a specific route, and we'll say we're going to the contacts page, right? So we send a request to the server. The server can only respond back with the index.html file. So he sends that back. But what happens is the React app sees that the route is for the /contact page. And so what he does is he loads up the contact.js component. And this is a component that we have to define ourselves. And this component is going to be like a wrapper component across all of the components that are going to make up our contacts page. So instead of actually loading a contacts.html file, we're instead loading a contact.js component, which will then contain all of the code and the logic and all of the HTML for our contacts page, and we load it dynamically. Now, if we then decide to navigate to, let's say, the /about route, you're probably thinking, well, what do we do now? Do we send a GET request with the route of /about to the server? Well, we could do that, but that wouldn't make sense because the server can only send back the index.html file because that's the only HTML file that he knows about. And we already have that loaded in the web browser, so there's no point in us sending a message all the way back to the server just to get the same file we already have. So instead, what happens is React Router will intercept this request, and he'll see that we want to navigate to the /about route. So what he'll do is he'll just basically take that information and he'll just tell React, hey, I want you to load the about.js component. And so this about.js component is like the contact.js component, except it's going to contain all the data that's associated with the about page. And so that's going to load all of that up dynamically. And from the user's perspective, right, he's not going to know that we didn't go all the way back to the server to retrieve this data because JavaScript is going to load up all this new content. And it's going to look like we navigated to a different page, even though the web browser never refreshed the page because JavaScript did this all on the back end and loaded this all up for the user. And that's why it's that's why it's referred to as a single page app, because the user never refreshes the page. The browser never refreshes the page. We load different data with JavaScript depending on which route we navigate to. So if we go to the /contacts page, we load a contacts.js component. And if we navigate to the /about page, React Router is just going to load up a different component that's going to show different data. And that's it, guys. That's really React in a nutshell. It's not complicated at all. I'm going to show you guys a simple application after this, and you'll see just how easy it is to work with. All right, guys, I think that's enough theory when it comes to React Router. So let's go ahead and get our hands dirty and let's start building out an application. So I've created a new project using the Create React tool. And so, we've got all the default code, which I'm going to delete as usual. And in here, we're going to create our index.js file and we're going to import the usuals. And we'll also need to make our app.js file. Before we start our application, we need to do one thing, and that's import or install React Router DOM. So let's go ahead and do an npm install React Router DOM. And you need to make sure you add the -DOM. I guarantee you someone's going to forget this. You don't want React Router, you want React Router DOM. All right, and let's do an npm start. And we got to make sure we save all as well. Okay, so we've got our application started. And what I want to build out is just a basic site with some common pages. So we're going to build a home page. We're going to build an about page. We're going to build a contact page. We may even add like a blog page or something. So, traditional links that you'll see on most websites. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make a new folder. We'll just call this components. And then within the components, let's add our pages. So we're going to make a home.jsx. And this will just return something arbitrary like home. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to put in an h1 tag. We'll say home. And then we can just type in lorem 100, and that's going to get some, lorem 100, and that's going to just generate some random text just to fill out our screen. And then we'll add an about.jsx. then we'll make a contact.jsx. And then finally, let's make a blog page. All right, so we've got all of our pages. Let's save that. Now that's not going to change our application because we actually haven't wired it up to handle the routing. So let's go to our application now. And here, what we want to do is, first of all, let's import all of these pages because we're going to be using all of those. So we'll do import about from slash blog or about for blog from okay, so we've got all of our pages imported. The last thing we need to do is import browser router from React Router DOM. I'm going to do that at the top. We'll do import browser router, and we'll actually need a few other things. So we'll do route, and we'll eventually get to switch as well. So add those three, and then we'll do from React Router DOM. And I'm going to delete this for now, and then we'll just do a multi-line JSX expression. And what we want to do is we want to wrap our application with the browser router tag. So this is going to allow us to route between different pages. And to actually set up routes, what we have to do is we have to define a route tag. And then we have to specify the path. So if the user goes to the slash route, we want to send them to our home component, right? Actually, I'm going to send this to slash home. And let's copy that and let's set up one for each and every link that we have. So we're going to have one for about, and that's going to go to our about component. We're going to have one for contact, and that's going to go to our contact component. And then lastly, we're going to have one for our blog. And that should send them to our blog component. All right, so hopefully this makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. All we're doing is browser router, when it receives a user going to our website, it'll check the route within the URL. So if it sees slash home, all it's going to do is load up this component, right? So that's how we're handling making our application look like a multi-page application. We're just loading up a different component. And right now, this home component basically represents all of the components that make up our home page, which right now is just an H1 tag with a whole bunch of text. But when you actually build out an application, it's going to be a lot more complex than this. There's going to be multiple other components within our homepage. So just keep that in mind. All right, and so let's save this and let's test this out. Okay, so when I refresh the page, you'll see that we see nothing on the screen. And that makes sense because you'll see that we haven't set up any routes for the slash, right? For just plain slash. We only have it for home, about, contacts, and blog. So if I type in slash home, hit enter, we can see that we load up our home component. And if I do an inspect, let's take a look at our components. Ignore a lot of these routes, but you can see that right now we've got our home component loaded, right? And if I change this to slash about, you'll see that it loads up the about page, and the only the only component that's getting loaded from the components that I've defined is the about page. And let's wrap up by verifying our last two links. So we got contact. So our contact page works, and then we've got our blog. So our blog page should work as well. Great. Okay. So everything's working. Now, before we move further, there's one strange behavior that I want to point out with how React Router works, and it's going to seem like it's broken, but it's not that it's broken. It's actually giving us a little flexibility, but it may be what we don't want. So we have to add in a few attributes to modify how it behaves, so that we force it to behave in a way that we would think it behaves. And to do that, I'm going to change our homepage to slash, because that makes sense, right? A lot of home pages are just located at the root directory. So let's save that. Actually, I'm going to go back to slash here as well. And I'm going to save that. Okay, so now when we go to our slash, we're going to go to our home component. That makes sense. Everything's working just the way you expected it to. What's going to happen, though, is once we go to the about page, we're going to see some unusual behavior. All right, so if I go to about, enter, you're going to see what I'm talking about, right? For some reason, we've loaded up our home component as well as our about page. And if we inspect with the React dev tools, you'll see that you've got home and about getting loaded up. And what's up with that, guys, right? That's a little weird. But if you take a look at how React Router works, it's going to make sense why it's doing that. So what happens is React Router doesn't look for an exact match on the URL. So what happens is he goes down this, or React Router is going to go down this list of routes, and it's going to see if it matches slash. And the thing about this URL is technically we do have the slash, right? So that's why it's matching the home page, because it has the slash, and so it matches that, except it doesn't exit out of there, right? So it's going to find a match, and then it's going to keep going down the list to see if it finds any other matches. So if we do if we go to slash about, right, we match this URL as well, right, because it's slash about. So we load up the about component as well, and it's going to be the same for all the other pages. If I go to contact, right, React Router is going to match the slash, so he's going to load up the home component, and then he's going to go down this list. He won't match about, but he will match slash contact, and he'll load up the contact page as well. And so this is probably an undesirable behavior. However, it does give us flexibility when it comes to how we load up different components based on the URLs. But for just navigating between pages, this is usually not what we want. And so an easy way to get around that is on the main URL for the slash, we add in the exact attribute. And so what this is going to say is that this will only match when it's only just a slash. So if it's slash contact, this is not an exact match. We'll go down the list to see if any other components match. So if we hit save, and so now when we go to the contacts page, we just have the contact, because even though there is a slash, it's not an exact match because it's slash contact. And let's verify our other links. So if we go to about, it should be just the about page. And then if we go just to slash, it matches just as well. And I do want to reiterate the fact that, even once we get a match within our router, we're going to keep going down the list to see if we have any other matches. And for that, I can show you that with this contact page again. And if I just copy that and paste that in again, and then this time add a different component, we'll add the about. And then hit save. And now if I go to contact, right, it loads up the contact and the about page because it matches this first route, and it's going to load up the contact component, and then it goes down and it sees what other routes it matches, and then it matches this other contact, so then it loads up the about as well. And you may or may not want this behavior, but if you don't want this behavior, all we have to do is use the switch method. I think it's called a method, but either way, it's easy. All we do is we take all of our routes and we wrap it in a switch tag. And we're going to take our switch tag, our closing tag, and we're going to wrap it around the bottom of our routes. And all the switch is going to do is it's going to say that after we match the first route, we're going to stop looking for other routes. So we're only going to load up one component always. And so now if I hit save, and we go to that slash contact, you'll see that we load just the, whoops, it looks like I deleted the other one. Let me add that back. I don't know why I did that. We want to make sure we add the about page now. So before, remember, we were loading up contact and about when we went to slash contact. If I hit save, you'll see that we do not load up the about page, because what happens is we go down this list, we find our first match, and then we see we match this statement right here. We load up contact, and because we're in a switch statement, we're going to break out of this and we won't look for any other routes that match. It's always the first match that we load up. And so if I move this up above the current one, you'll see that we now load up the about page when we go to contact, and that's because this route exists before this route. So this is going to be the first match, and React Router is going to load this up and then break out. Anyway, so we don't need that, and let me go ahead and delete that. All right, guys, so that was just a brief intro to React Router. In the next video, we're going to keep adding some functionality to this website, because right now to switch between pages, we have to manually go in, change the link, and update it. But an actual website is either going to have links on the page that take us to different pages, or at least a nav bar that allows us to kind of navigate between two pages. So we'll take a look at how we can implement that using React Router in the next video. In the last video, we set up a few different routes for our application. So we have one for the home page, one for the about page, one for the contact page, and one for the blog page. However, the only way to navigate between them is to manually go in and change the URL. And so what we're going to do now in this video is we're going to build out a nav bar with links that we can click to take us from one page to another. So let's go to the components folder. We'll make a new component and call this nav bar. And I'm just going to do RAFCE. And for now, let's just get this loaded. So I'll do navbar. And what we want to do is we want to import it into our app file. So we'll do import navbar. And let's see where we want to put this. We could technically put it up here, but you're going to see that this won't work once we get to a later video. It'll break it when we start using link tags. So what we want to do is for the nav bar, we want to put it within the browser router. However, we don't want to put it within the switch statement, because if we add a route in the switch statement, what's going to happen is we're only going to load the nav bar for one of our pages. And we want the nav bar to load up on every single one of our pages, regardless if it's the home page or the about page or the contact page. And so to make sure that the nav bar is loaded on every page, we'll just put it right here above the switch statement, but within the browser router tags. So let's do navbar. All right, and let's do a save all. And we've got the navbar, and if I go to another page, like contact, we should see that the navbar is still loaded. So that means everything's working. We've got our navbar being rendered out on every single page. Now let's go add a few links into our navbar so that we can navigate to different pages within our application. I'm going to change this to a multi-line JSX expression, and we'll do a UL for some links. And then we'll do an LI for each of the different links. And so you're probably thinking, how do we set up links? So you're probably thinking that, for links within our application, we just use an anchor tag, right? Because that's what we normally do. So let's try that out. So we'll do A, and then the href. So for this one's going to be for home. So I'll say when we go to /home, or we go to home when we click this link, and this will say link. This will say home. And then for about, this will be about, then about, contact, and lastly, we need one for blog. All right, so we've got our links in place. Let's save that and let's see how this all works out. Okay, we've got our links, and let's try this out. So right now I'm on the contact page. Let's see what happens when I hit home. Okay, it looks like it's kind of working. If I hit about, it takes us to our about page. If I hit contacts, it takes us to our contacts page. And if I hit blog, it takes us to our blog page. So it looks like it's working. However, behind the scenes, we're actually breaking a few things. Okay. And what I want you guys to do is focus on the network tab within your Chrome developer tools, and notice what happens when I click a different link. So this is going to show us any, like network related requests. And so, here we went to /blog and it's saying that we sent a request. Let's see, headers. We sent a request to HTTP localhost :3003/blog. So that means we're sending a GET request all the way back to our web server, which is just our development server in this case, but we're sending it back to the web server. And the web server is responding with our index.html. So this response is our index.html, which is within our public folder. That's this file right here. And so you'll see word for word, it's the exact same thing. And you're going to see why this is bad. Okay. So if I hit contact, right, you'll see that we sent another network request. But this time we sent it to http://localhost :3003/contact. So once again, when I clicked a different link, we went back to our web server and we asked for a GET request. We sent a GET request to them and they responded back with the index.html, right? Which is a waste because we already have this index.html and we never want to send a request back to the web server when we're working in a React application or any single page application. And keep in mind that every time we do this, we're actually refreshing our page, right? And you'll notice the little refresh. If I hit blog, you'll see that it refreshes, right? And that means anytime we refresh, we're losing all of our state in our application. So all of that state, all that information about the application is going to get deleted when we click on one of these links. And that's because that's the default behavior of an anchor tag. An anchor tag is always going to refresh the page and send a request back out to the server and retrieve a new HTML file. And so to prevent this behavior, what we have to do is instead of using anchor tags in our React application, we have to use link tags. And these special link tags are from the React Router DOM library. So we'll import that. And I'm going to change this to link. Okay, so I've changed them all to links. We need to remove the href because there is no href attribute within a link tag. Instead, it's called to. But it does the same thing. So anytime someone navigates to /contact, we're going to send them to the contact page. And we're going to remove this and change that to a to. And this is going to be /about. Okay, so let's save this and let's go to our elements tab and let's see what happens or what gets rendered out when we actually use a link tag. So if I go to the body, within our root, we've got our ULs and then we've got our links. Okay, and so you'll notice that this link tag just renders out an anchor tag. So it's basically exactly what we had before. When it comes to how the HTML gets rendered out, it does nothing different. It just renders out an anchor tag for us. However, the main difference is when we use a link tag, it prevents the default action of when an anchor tag is clicked. So when these anchor tags get selected, we'll no longer perform the default behavior of sending a request back to the web server. Right? It's kind of like, when we submit a form in React, we always have to do that event.prevent default. This is essentially doing that for us. And so instead of having to send a request back out to the server, instead we let React Router DOM take over and load up the correct component based off of the URL that we're navigating to. And so I'm going to go back to the networks page, and you'll see that since we're on the blog page, we sent a request to localhost/blog, and that makes sense because that's the first time we've loaded up our application. However, if I hit home, you'll see that this didn't refresh, right? It still says blog. We didn't send another network request, but we've loaded up the home component. And if I select about, we navigate to the about page, but we don't send a new request. And if we go to contact, that works as well. And all of our state is still intact, even though we don't have any state in this application at the moment. But this is the purpose behind using link tags, is that they're going to allow React Router DOM to just load up different components instead of actually performing the default behavior of an anchor tag. Okay, so I think that covers links for this video. In the next video, I'm going to perform just a tiny bit of styling. I know I don't really like to focus too much on style in this course, but you'll see why I want to add a little style, because we're going to cover nav links, which is similar to links, but it's slightly different. And I want to add some style to actually show you how that can be used properly. All right, guys, so we're going to do a little bit of styling for our application. So we're going to make our nav bar look a little better. So let's go to our source folder and let's make a new file. So this is going to be our CSS file. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some CSS that I've already written beforehand, and I'm just going to paste it into here. And I'm just going to slowly just kind of scroll down so that you guys have a chance to copy all of this onto your project code. And I've also included this and all other project related files in the course. So if you go to the last video of this specific project, you'll see that we have the completed code in there. And so you can just copy that and paste it into here. So now that we get our CSS, we need to import our CSS. So I'll do import app.css, hit save. And it looks like it did nothing. So let's make sure we didn't mess up something. Ah, that's right. So now we actually have to go into our nav bar and change up the JSX that we're rendering. And so the first thing I want to do is let's just comment this out for now. And we're going to add some nav tags. And then within there, we want to add a link. I'm going to add a link tag that's going to say it's going to have a class name of logo. And that's going to go to slash like we had before. And this is just going to say brand dash logo. So this is going to be like the logo of our website. And so this is going to be like our button to get back to our homepage. Then we want a div with a class of nav dash links. And then here we want to add another link. And this is going to have a class of link. We'll do class name equals link. And it's going to have a 2. And this one's going to be for the about page. So this will say about. And we can just copy this a few times. So then we've got the next one, which is going to be for contact. And then finally blog. All right, let's save that and let's take a look. All right, so we've got our CSS in place, and that's all I wanted to do in this video. So this is going to be just a short video. You'll see in the next video why I actually ended up styling this. You're going to see that we're going to introduce something called nav links, which operate pretty similar to links, but there's going to be one slight difference. And I needed to make sure that our app was styled properly so that I can show you the difference. All right, now that we've got our app styled, I want us to import nav link from React Router DOM. And nav links operate pretty much exactly the same way that links do, but there's just one minor difference. And I'm going to show you that real quick. So let's change all of our link tags to nav links. And an easy way to do that with VS Code is if you click on one of the links and just hit Control and then D, and then hit it again, it's going to find all the other instances of links. And then we can just type in nav link and it's going to update all of them. Okay, so let's hit save. And now if we go to our elements and let's go to our div and then we go to our nav and then let's go to our links. And I want to show you something very specific, and that's right now we're on the contacts page. And if you take a look at the classes that are assigned to the contacts page, you'll see that we've got an active class. However, if you go to our CSS file, I don't have sorry, if you go back to our nav bar, you'll see that nowhere am I placing the active class on any of these link tags. And so this is actually React Router doing this. So what it does is when you change this to nav links, it's going to find which route you're specifically on, and it's going to automatically add a class of active for you. So if I hit blog now, right, you'll see what changes. Contact no longer has a class of active, but blog now has a class of active. And if I go to about, you're going to see the same thing. We've got an active class on about, and it's been removed for the other two links. So that's the only difference between links and nav links, is that nav links will automatically find out which page that we're on, and it's going to automatically assign a class of active. And why would we want to have a class of active? Well, usually in a nav bar, you're going to kind of highlight the fact that you're on that page, right? In some way, shape, or form, usually either changing the color or adding like a background or something. So if we go to our app.css and we can just do we can do class of active. And I'm going to just change the color just a little bit. So I'm just going to copy this right here, paste it in here, and I'm just going to change this to like 0.9. So it's going to make it just a little bit darker. And so now you can see that the about page is a little bit darker. If I hit contacts, you can see now contact is a little bit darker, and that's because now contact has that active class, which then sets the text color to this color. And then if I select blog, you can see that it gets a little bit darker than the other two. So this just provides a little bit of feedback to the user to let them know what page they're on. Now you may want to adjust what class React Router assigns to the active link. And we can do that by going back to navbar and then assigning a attribute called active class name, and then we can set that equal to anything that we want. So let's say we want to change the active class to let's say selected page. And I'm going to copy this and just paste this on all of the nav links. And so now if I hit save and we go to our developer console and then go to the nav links, you'll see that for the selected page, which is right now /blog, right? Because we're on /blog, we now add the class of selected page. And so we can go back to our app.css and change this to selected page. So we can get the same behavior with the slight darkening, right? So now blog is a little bit darker. If I select contact, now that's a little bit darker. If I select about, that's a little bit darker. And you can see that we've assigned the selected page class to that link. And so that pretty much wraps up how nav links work. All right, guys. So now what I want to do is I want to take a look at our blog page and I want to make a slight modification. Let's say for our application or our website, instead of just having a static blog page, I want to break it out into categories. So let's have a category for, say, like dogs. Let's have another category for, a blog about cars, maybe one for recipes. And so we can accomplish this using relative URLs and paths. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that in this video. So what we'll do is let's go to our blog component, and I'm going to just delete this h1 tag. We don't need that anymore, or any of that text. And what I want to do is go to their components and add a dogs.jsx. So this component is going to represent all of our, it's going to represent our dog blog. And then we're going to have one for cars, and then one for recipes. Whoops. Just delete that. Should be recipes.jsx. And I'm just going to put in recipes, and then dogs, we're just going to do the same thing. And then we'll do the same thing for cars as well. All right, and so when we navigate to the blog page, what I want to do is I want to have a few links that will basically take us to either the cars page or the dogs page, or the recipes page. So like we did before, let's set up our links. I'm just going to set up a UL and then a few LIs. And then within the LI, that's going to be a link tag. So let's import link from React Router DOM. So I'll just do link, and then this should import it. There we go. And then we need to specify the path. So how I want to set up the routing within our website is anytime they want to go to the dog blog or the cars blog or the recipes blog, the user needs to navigate to /blog. And then from there, they'll do either cars or dog or recipes. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get the URL of the specific route. So what we need to do is we need to get the relative URL. So what we'll do is I'm going to delete this for now. And we're going to use a special hook called use route match. And we're going to import that from React Router DOM. And I'm going to set this to, I'm going to destructure both path and URL because we're going to use both of these. And let's just console.log both of those. So if we do console.log path and then URL, let's take a look at what that looks like. We'll put this within our, this is in our blog. So if I hit save and we go to blog/recipes, we take a look at this, we can see that we went to blog. Okay. So that's going to be the relative URL. So we're within the blog. And so what we want to do is for the link, we want to set the to attribute to, we're going to do a template string here. And we'll say that we're going to put in the URL that we have. So this is going to go up to blog. So we'll get all of this localhost up to blog. And then from there, we want to go to recipe. So that'll be the first link. And I'm going to copy this and paste it a few times and change it. So then the next one is going to be dogs. And the last one is going to be cars. All right, so hopefully this made sense. We're getting the relative URL. So right now, when we get to the blog page, we know that it's going to be /blog. And then from there, we want to send a link that goes to blog. And remember, URL is just blog. So we go to blog/recipes or blog/dogs or blog/cars. Then let's go ahead and set up our routes. So I'm going to put in a switch statement because I only want to match one. And I'll set the first route. And we're going to have to import that as well. So we'll import route. So we just imported it in there. And we'll send the path is equal to. And here we're going to do pretty much the same thing as we did here. So we will do curly braces, and then we'll do a template string, and then we'll match path. So this is going to match the path. And this is also going to come out to being blog as well. So technically we could put in URL, but you want to stick to path for now. And so we do path and then /, and then we'll do recipes. So this route is going to take us to recipes, and we want to load the recipes component. And we'll copy this, and we're going to paste that a few times. And so we'll just change this to dogs and cars. Let's hit save, and looks like we got a few errors. So let's see what that's about. And let's just do a save all. Okay, so now I forgot to actually put in text into our link, so let's add that in there. So do recipes, dogs, and then cars. And let's go back to the home page first. Okay, and let's see how the navigation works. So I'm going to go back to app.jsx. And so when I hit blog, it's going to take us to slash blog. That's going to be our route. So we'll load up the blog component, right? Then we go into our blog component and we render out a few links. And so first we're going to destructure the path and the URL, and that's going to be slash blog, right? And then what we do is we set up relative links. So relative to where we are right now, which is what URL represents, we're going to set up a link that goes to slash recipes, and then another link that goes to slash dogs, and then another one that goes to slash cars. So it's always going to be blog recipes, blog dogs, and blog cars. And then we set up a few more routes from the blog page, and these are all going to be relative routes as well. And it's going to be relative based off of the path that we currently are at right now, which is slash blog. And we're going to get that from the path variable. And so we're going to set up a route to slash blog slash recipes, a route to slash blog slash dogs, and then slash blog slash cards. And so if we go to slash blog slash recipes, it's going to load up the recipe component. And it's going to be the same thing for dogs, and then it'll be the same thing for cars. So if I select recipes, you can see we loaded up the recipe component. If we select dogs, it'll load up the dogs. And if we load the cars, what happened to cars? Did I not save this? Oh, I put a D right here. All right, so now if I do cars, there we go. So all three of our sites or our subsites are working. So that's how you kind of set up nested routing, where we can set up relative routes based off of what page we're on. And we can always go to one of these pages directly. So let's say we're on the home page and I want to navigate to that cars blog. Well, I can do blog and I can do cars, and that's going to take us directly there. All right. All right, guys. So in this video, we're going to set up a simple authentication system. And this isn't going to be a real authentication system because that's really outside of the scope of this course. Instead, all we're going to do is we're going to use the context API to provide a simple Boolean as a state. And that Boolean is going to be called is logged in. And that's basically going to signify whether the user is logged in or logged out. And the reason we're doing this is because in the next video, I want to show you guys how to set up protected routes using React Router. And to do that, we need to have some sort of authentication or some kind of way to determine if the user is logged in. So we're just going to have a simple Boolean that's going to keep the state of whether the user is logged in, and we're going to provide that using the context API so that all of our components have access to it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on making that. I'm going to go into the source folder. We'll make a new folder called context. And then within the context, I'm going to make a new file, and we'll call this authcontext.js. I'm going to import React, and then we're going to create our context. So let's export const, and we'll call it authcontext. And then we'll need to import create context. And then let's define our provider component. And here I'm going to define our state. So it's going to be called is logged in. And this is just going to be a Boolean. And by default, it's going to start off as being false, which means the user won't be logged in. And let's make sure that I import useState. So we'll let Visual Studio Code do that for us. And then I'm going to set that back to false. And here I'm just going to pass down both of those. So is logged in, as well as set is logged in. Just because I don't feel like defining like a handle function and then passing it down, we can just pass this down and update it within the other components. Close that off, and we want to make sure that we render the props.children. All right, so we've got our context set up. Now let's go to our nav bar, and within our nav bar, I want to add a button. And this is going to be just a simple button. And basically what we're going to do is, based off of whether the user is logged in, actually, let me wire up the context first, or our provider. So let's go to our app component and let's wire it up here. So we'll do auth context provider. And then we're going to wrap our entire application with that. And now let's go back to navbar and let's actually import the context. So we'll do const, and then we're going to make sure we destructure out is logged in and set is logged in. And then we need to import use context. And we also need to import auth context. All right, so we've got our consumer set up now. And let's go ahead and set up the logic for a button. So what I want the button to do is when the user's logged in, I want it to say log out. And when the user's logged out, I want it to say log in. And then basically we'll set up an on-click event handler so that when the button's clicked, we're going to change the state of is logged in. So that's how we're going to kind of represent how we're logging in and out of the application. So obviously not real authentication, but it's going to do just enough so that I can show you guys how to set up protected routes in React. And so here, all we have to do is just pass in some curly braces and we'll pass in some JavaScript. So we'll do is logged in. So if the user's logged in, what we want to do is we want to say log out. And if he is not logged in, we want to say log in. Okay, let's hit save. And we see it says log in because the default state is that the user is logged out. Then we need to handle the logic for when the button's clicked. So if I do on click equals, and then here pass an arrow function and we'll say set is logged in. Let me make this a little bigger. Capitalize too many letters. And we'll just say we're going to set it to the opposite of is logged in. So that's going to toggle our authentication status. So let's hit save. And let's try this out. So right now, if we go to our components, and let's go to our context provider. And so right now we see that is logged in is set to false. So if I hit login, you can see that it changes out to log out now. And it says that is logged in is true. And if I click that again, it says login, and we've changed it to false. All right, so we've set up our authentication system. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and set up some protected routes, and I'll show you guys how React Router handles that. Now that we have our authentication in place, let's go ahead and set up a protected route. So the first thing is we're going to create a new component, and I'll just call this admin. So like this can represent the admin page of our application. So this is something that you would want the user to be logged into before they can access this page. So I'm going to go under components. We'll do new file, and I'll call this admin.jsx. And I'll set up the boilerplate for that, and we'll just render out an h1 tag that says admin. Okay, so this is going to be our protected page right here. The next thing that I want to do is we have to go into our nav bar and set up a link so that users can access this page. So I'm going to copy this right here and just paste it one step below and just make sure we change the to admin. And this is going to say admin. And then let's set up the routes in our app.js. So I'll copy this. And I'm going to change this to admin. And so right now, if I do a save all, we should see the admin page or the admin link pop up. And so now, if we click it, it looks like it's not rendering that page. Let's make sure that everything is working. So let's see, /admin. That's good. Oh, right here, I forgot to change this to admin. And we're going to have to import it as well, so I'll automatically import that. Hit save, and now if I select this, let me go back to the home page. So if I select the admin page, you can see it takes us to the admin page. So right now it's not a protected route. and any user can access it. So to make this a protected route, there's a couple of different ways of doing this. I'm going to start off by showing you the simplest method of doing this in this video. And then in the next video, I'll show you another way of doing it, which is a little more complex, but it's just another way of doing it. So let's go to our admin.jsx. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import our is logged in state. So I'll do const destruct route is logged in. And then we'll say that's equal to need use context. So I'll import that. And then I'll import in our auth context as well. And all I'm going to do is this very simple if statement. So I'm going to say if the user is not logged in. So if not is logged in, I want to perform a certain task. And now what we can do here is we can actually redirect the user in this if statement. So we're saying that if the user's not logged in, I want to redirect you to, let's say, the home page. Or, usually in an actual website, you would redirect them to a login page, but I don't technically have a login page. So I'm just going to redirect the user to the home page. And to do that, we actually have to import one thing from React Router DOM. So we'll do import. And we have to import the redirect. That's going to be from React Router DOM. And all we have to do is just say return. So we need to return the function. And then say redirect to equals. And then we want to set whatever URL that we want to redirect to. So we're going to send them to our home page, which is just /. And we'll close out that tag and let's give that a shot. Okay, so let's go to our home page. So right now we're on our home page. And let's see what happens when we go to the admin page. And keep in mind that since it says login here, that means we are actively not logged in. So we are logged out at the moment. So if I hit admin, you can see that nothing happens, right? And so it's basically just redirecting me to the home page really quickly. And I can show you that. So if I go to blog and then hit admin now, it just takes us to the home page. However, if we hit login, and now if we hit go to admin page, it takes us to the admin page. So we now set up a protected route where only logged in users can view. All right, so in the next video, I'll show you guys how to create a special component or a special route component that'll perform this same logic. Okay, guys, in the last video, I showed you guys how to make the admin page a protected route, and it was pretty simple. All we had to do was just set up an if statement to check if we're logged in, and if we're not, we just redirect to our home page. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys a slightly different way of doing this. So I'm going to comment this out for now, and this should make this page no longer a protected page. So if we go to, if we see that we're not logged in at the moment, if we go to admin, you can see that we can access the admin page. All right, so this is now a public page, just like the about page or the contact page. And what I want to do now is I want to define a new component. And we're going to call this private route.jsx. And I'm just going to do an RAFC. So we'll create this component. And this is going to be a special component because the whole purpose of this component is to behave just like any other route component from the React Router DOM library. The only difference is that it's going to return a route component. So it's going to be a route component that returns another route component. And the reason we're doing this is because within this component, we can add a little extra logic to say, if the user's logged in, we want to do something. And if the user's not logged in, then we want to do something else. And so there's going to be a few things we need to import. So the first thing is we need to get access to our is logged in state. So we'll do const is logged in equals use context. And then we do auth context. All right, so we've got our state now. And what we want to do is we want to return a route, a standard route component. So we'll do route. And we're going to have to import this from the React Router DOM library. So I'll just click that. And then we have access to, so first of all, what I want to do is we're going to pass in a lot of props into our private route component, right? And the props we're going to pass into is, if we go back to app.jsx, we know we're going to pass a child prop because that's ultimately going to be the component that we want to render. But there's going to be a few other props like the path prop and a few others that are going to get passed down. So we need to essentially save those. So we'll say, I'm going to basically destructure all the props and I'm going to grab the children prop and store that in a variable called children. And then I'm going to take all the other props and I'm going to store them in a variable called rest. So this just means the rest of the props. So we got children and then the rest of the props. And what I want to do is I want to then pass the rest of the props that we gathered and pass it into this route component. That makes sense, right? Because any of the props that are getting passed into our private route that we're going to declare right here, we want to pass it down into the new route that we're going to return. So I'm going to just spread those out. So we'll just do ... rest. And then finally, we're going to call the render prop. So the render, we can then pass in a function. And here we'll pass an arrow function with props. And then we'll say that we're going to we're going to return. And then basically I'm going to do a ternary operator and say that if we are logged in, I'm going to return children. All right. Remember, we destructured out the children prop, which if we go back to how a route is defined, the children prop is going to have the component that we want to render out. So I'm going to render that out, or I'm going to return that from our route component. And if we're not logged in, well, then we're going to just do a redirect. And we're going to have to import that in as well. So I just did that there. And I'm going to redirect that to the home page. And it looks like we've got some errors. Hold on, let's see what I did wrong here. And we need to close this off as well. There we go. So all we're doing is we're just taking the normal props that come into the route component, and then we're going to return a new route component depending on if we're logged in or not. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. If we hit save, then we go down to app.jsx, and we're going to change our route component here to be a private route. So we'll do private route, and then we'll import that. And then we got to change this to private route. Hit save. And so now let's give this a shot. So let's go to admin. Right, and you can see we got redirected to the home page. So it looks like it's working. Let's log in and let's go to the admin page, and it works. All right, so now our custom component works perfectly. And so now anytime we want to set up a private route, instead of just nesting it within a route component, we're going to nest it with a private route component. Now there's one thing I want to point out, and there is a slightly different way of defining routes. So here I've been using the child prop. However, we can change this and actually define it in a slightly different way. So instead of defining it with a child prop, we can actually do route. And then here, I had the exact attribute passed in. And then we'll do path equals / like we did before. But we can also specify component, right? And so here, this is going to tell us what component we want to render. So here I'll say we want to render the home component. And then I'll close that out. So self-closing tag. If I hit save, and then I hit go to our homepage, it looks like it's working. So if we go to about, it's working. Homepage, it's working. So this is just another way of defining things. And this is, logically going to do the same thing as defining our routes like this, where we pass in a child prop. So, do whatever you prefer. The only thing the reason why I wanted to highlight this difference is that our private route component that we defined right here, this is only going to work when we pass in our child prop. So it only works when we set up routes like this. Now we can get this private route component to work when we have it set up like this, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to define a new component, and I'll just call this a private route 2.jsx just to signify that it's different. And for the most part, the logic's going to be exactly the same. We're just going to modify just a few things. So here we'll do const. And then actually, let me just do RAFC for now. And we know we're going to have to import our state. So we'll do const is logged in. And we'll do use context. And then auth context. And here, when we're destructuring out the data, we no longer care about the child prop, right? Because we're not passing in a child prop. Instead, we care about the component prop. So let's destructure that. And so we'll go back to private route 2. We'll destructure component. However, we're going to whoops, I spelled that wrong. Component. However, we're going to destructure that out and rename it to a component with a capitalized C. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to make sure that when we call component, that this is actually capitalized, because React expects all components to be capitalized. So that's why we're essentially just renaming that to component with a capital C. And then lastly, we want to do the ... rest. So we're going to take the rest of the props and store it in a object called rest. And then in our return statement, we're going to return another route. So we'll import that. And we want to destructure, or we want to pass all the props that were passed in the private route 2 into our new route. And then we're going to call the render function again. And then we're going to pass in that function, that arrow function. And then we're going to render out, we're going to do the same ternary operator. So we'll do return. And then we'll do is logged in. Then we want to render out our component, right? Because it's stored within this variable right here. So component. And that's why we had to capitalize it, right? Because every component has to have a capitalized first letter. So we'll do component. And we want to pass in all of the props. And if we're not logged in, then we need to redirect. So we'll import redirect. 2 equals /. So we'll close off that, and we'll close off our route. And sorry, this here should be rest. So we're copying the rest of the props. All right, so let's give that a shot. So I'm going to go to, where's our page? app.jsx. And I'm first going to change this to a one-liner or a self-closing tag with the component property. So here I'll do path and then component equals, what is it called? Admin. And then we'll remove this. And let's change this to private route 2. Now I was hoping it would auto import for us private route 2. And then change that to private route 2. Hit save, and hopefully this should work. Although I didn't test it out myself beforehand. So let's see. We're on the home page. That's fine. We're not logged in. So let's actually, did I save everything? Yep. So let's go to admin. And it looks like it's redirecting us to the home page, but let's make sure by going to the about page first and then hitting admin. Perfect. So it's redirecting us. And then we hit login. So now we're logged in. And if we go to the admin page, it did not load up the admin page. So let's see what went wrong. All right. So I found the mistake, guys. So I accidentally did a capital O right there. And if I change that, it should now work, hopefully. So let's try this out. So right now we're not logged in. And so I'm going to go to the about page. We'll go to the admin page. We get redirected to the home page. I hit login, then I go to the admin page. There we go. We've loaded up the admin page. So this is how you would set it up if you were defining your routes using the component prop. And then we've got private route as well. And that's going to be used when you're defining your components or your routes using child props. And I'm sure there's a way to combine all of this logic into one reusable component so that, you know, regardless of which method you use, it's going to be able to render out your components properly, regardless of whether it's a child prop or if you're using the component prop. But I think that's probably not worth our time, and it's kind of outside of the scope of this this course. So hopefully you guys have a decent understanding of how to set up private routes. Now we've tackled a few different solutions, and feel free to use whichever one you feel most comfortable with. In this section, we're going to discuss URLs and really try to understand what they do and provide for us as a user. And after we have a solid understanding of what URLs are and how they work, We'll talk about the limitations of single page apps when it comes to URLs, and we'll see how we can overcome these limitations using the HTML History API. So let's start off by defining what a URL is. At its basic definition, a URL is just a way of identifying a unique resource on your website. And by resource, this can really be anything. So if we had a blog site, a URL could represent a unique blog post, or if we owned a e-commerce site, a URL could represent an individual product that store is selling. So it can really represent anything. And with these URLs, what we can actually do is we can link directly to them or even bookmark them so that, when you click on the link or when you go back into your bookmarks and you select that bookmark, you'll always get sent to the same page and see the same exact resource that you originally saw. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a few websites so that we can actually see how URLs work in practice. So here I've navigated to Amazon.com, and so that's going to be our URL. It's going to take us to the homepage. And our exact URL is technically Amazon.com and then slash. However, when you have the slash, for the most part, it just takes it away. But just know that our exact URL is technically slash, which is normally the homepage for most websites. Now, this URL is unique to the homepage. So anytime you navigate to Amazon.com, it's going to take you exactly to this page. But if we scroll down and let's say we're interested in reading Harry Potter, so we select this link right here, it's going to take us to a completely separate link. And this link is important, not because the actual data or information in the link is important, but this link is important in the sense that this link will always represent this page. So anytime we ever want to navigate to this exact page and see the Harry Potter book, we can just navigate to this link. And this is great because if I just copy this and then I open up a new tab and just paste it in there, you'll see that it loads up that exact page. So this link represents this page. And so if we have another website and we wanted a link to this page right here, we just copy that URL and paste it in. And so anytime a user clicks on that URL, it's going to take us right to this page. And on top of that, if we ever bookmark this page, you'll see that when we actually click on our bookmarks or our favorites and click on that favorite that we created, it's going to take us exactly back to this page. And that's what URLs provide for us. And this is the same across most websites. So here I've got another blog open. And so if I go and click on one of the recipes, so I'll just click on the super chocolatey extra small batch brownies. First of all, notice the URL. So when we click on this, it takes us to a new URL, and this URL represents this specific blog post. And so, this is going to operate just like it does on the Amazon page. So anytime we navigate to this URL, it's going to take us to this exact same web page. So users can bookmark this page and they won't get navigated to the home page. Instead, they'll get taken directly to this page. Now, it's important to understand with a website like Amazon, which is what's referred to as a multi-page app, it's not a single page app like the ones we've been working on with React. And same with this blog, right? These are all multi-page apps. So if we ever navigate to a different URL, what happens is the web browser, first of all, is going to send a GET request to their backend server, and it's going to ask for this exact URL. So whatever page, HTML file that represents that specific URL is going to get sent back to us. We're going to reload the page, and then it's going to display that new HTML file. And we can actually prove that. So if I go back to the home page, I'm just going to open up our developer console, and I'm going to move this down. Forget how to do that. Here we go. And here we can go into the networks tab. So this is going to see all the network related requests that our web browser is sending. And we want to go into the doc tab. So this is going to look for a very specific type of request. And what I want to do is I want to just hit refresh real quick. And you'll notice that, we sent a request back to the web server. And this is the main request right here. So this is just asking for the home page. And if I go into the headers, you'll see that we sent a request for, https://amazon.com/ ignore the ref equals nav / logo. Just remember, we're still on the home page. But Amazon does a few extra things because it's such a big website and they add, a few extra features. So ignore that. Just think of it as we're just navigating to /. So we sent a request back to their, backend web server asking for this exact web page. And what happens is the web server responds and we can see the response under the response tab with this HTML file. So this is the HTML file that got sent to our web browser, and this is the exact HTML file that's loaded and we're looking at right now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually clear out all of this. So this is going to clear all of that. So we have an empty box right here, and I'm going to click on a link on this web page. So we'll go back to the Harry Potter, and we'll see what happens when it comes to network-related requests. So I'm going to click this. Hopefully you noticed one thing. First of all, we can already tell that the page refreshed, okay? And so that's the expected behavior when we navigate to a different URL, because we're going to load up a new HTML file. So we are refreshing everything. And click on the first link right here, and you'll see the request that we made. So we sent a request to that exact URL that's up here to their backend server saying, can you please give us this HTML file? And the server responded back with the exact HTML file. So this is how a multi-page app works. Every URL represents essentially a different HTML file that the web server is going to load and send to our web browser, who can then load it up. All right, so keep in mind that the way traditional apps work, and this is important, whenever you change URLs, it's going to trigger a request to the backend server and reload our web page. All right, and this creates problems for us when we're building out single page apps, right? Because first of all, when we utilize JavaScript and Ajax to automatically, render the content of our application, we are never actually loading a new page. That's how single page apps work. We're always on the same page, the same HTML file. We're just loading different things using JavaScript and Ajax. And in a single page application, we never actually want to refresh the page, because if you recall, whenever we perform a refresh of the page, we're clearing all of our state. So we lose all state of our application, and it's going to be almost as if the user first navigated to our page. So we never ever want to refresh when we perform or when we operate in a single page application. However, this creates a few problems, because if we're never refreshing our page, and because JavaScript and Ajax are kind of handling the responsibility of loading different pages, what happens is we never actually update the URL, right? Because we're never going to a different, we're never going or navigating to a different URL, because we're never actually sending a request back to their backend server asking for a new HTML file. And this creates a problem because if you recall, each resource on a website is traditionally assigned a URL, just like this Harry Potter book has this URL, just like this blog post has this URL. So if we were building a Amazon clone as a single page app, technically every single book or item within the store, instead of being loaded up by going to a different URL, whenever a user would click on a book in a single page app, it would just send a request back to the backend server, not asking for a new HTML file, but instead asking just for the contents of what needs to be loaded, and then JavaScript will take over and just load that data. So we would never actually be changing URLs. And so you could think of it as our URL would always look like this, Amazon.com. No matter what links we clicked on, no matter what items we look at, will always be on Amazon.com, because we're never actually asking for another resource. We're never changing the URL or anything like that. And that can create lots of issues for users, because if the URL is always Amazon.com, no matter which item they go to, if they bookmark the page, they're always bookmarking Amazon.com, right? And if we go to Amazon.com, it's just going to take us to the home page. So no matter what item they bookmark, they'll always get sent back to the home page. And that's going to create a bad user experience, because then they essentially defeats the purpose of bookmarks in this case. And so that's really the fundamental flaw of single page apps, is that we lose that ability to, link to specific pages in our application, because there technically aren't truly any different pages in our application. It's just kind of a made up construct that, JavaScript will just load up different contents that represent different pages, but there aren't really different pages in our single page app. And so that's one of the main differences between a multi-page app and a single page app. And that creates problems. And so this section, we're going to focus on how we can get around this problem by utilizing the HTML history API. And, before I actually go into, what that history API is and, how it works, just know that really it's just there to kind of make our single page app operate a little bit more like a multi-page app where we have different URLs for different pages. But at the end of the day, it's still a single page app. So there's still only one HTML file we ever get back from our backend server. And that HTML file will still have JavaScript and Ajax, loading different data. But with the history API, we'll have different URLs that users can, bookmark and provide links to, and it'll take them to that exact resource that they're looking for. And keep in mind also, in a single page app, if we don't implement the history API, it also breaks the forward and back functionality. Because if I select if I go back to this Harry Potter book and I hit back, it takes me back to this page, but I can go forward and it takes me back to Harry Potter. However, if we didn't have the URLs updating like that, if I hit back from this Harry Potter book, it's not going to take us back to the Amazon homepage because the URL would technically still be Amazon.com. It would take us to the previous website we were on before we navigated to Amazon.com. So that's another reason why. That's just another example of how single page apps have limitations. But once again, we can overcome all of those limitations using the history API. And so that's what we're going to tackle in the next video. And I'll see you guys there. All right, guys. So in this video, we're going to talk about the history API. And what the history API does is it gives us the ability to modify a website's URL without a full page refresh. So this is obviously super useful for single page apps to kind of navigate around the limitations that I discussed in the previous video, where we want to be able to give users the ability to link to specific portions of our website or specific pages, as well as bookmark pages so that they can return back to the same resource that they were originally looking at. And to actually demonstrate this, what I want to do is I want to take a look at a well-known single page application. And that is, I'm going to go to twitter.com. All right. And so this is a single page app, and we can actually confirm that just based off the behavior. So if we go to our networks tab again, and we go into the doc subfolder, whatever you want to call it, you'll see that we sent a GET request for twitter.com. And that's exactly what we did. We got the page. Technically, we get redirected to the URL of twitter.com/explore, but don't worry about that. So just know that we sent a request back to the server and we got the initial page. Now, if we clear this out so that we only see new requests that come in, if I select or if I search for, let's say, Aaron Rodgers, right? Let's see if he's on Twitter. Looks like he is. And if I select this, it takes us to a new URL. So it takes us to twitter.com/AaronRodgers12. But notice how under this doc section, we sent no new requests, right? And so that's because this is a single page app. So we're not going to send another GET request to receive a new HTML page for twitter.com/AaronRodgers. Instead, what we did was we sent a request using JavaScript, using like the fetch API, and we just retrieve some data, right? And that data is going to be all the data that's being displayed here. So it's going to get the data about Aaron Rodgers, most recent posts and things like that. And then it's going to dynamically load that onto the same HTML page that we've been working on. And you could see the other requests by going to XHR and fetch. So you could see all the other fetch requests that this page sent out. So there's a ton. And so that's how we see all this new data about Aaron Rodgers. Now, to actually show you how the history API works, I'm just going to click on a few links. So we're going to go to like NFL. I'm just going to make sure we navigate to a whole bunch of different pages on their website. Maybe ESPN. Now we take a look at that. And then let's see what's trending. Dennis Miller, whoever that is, he's trending. All right. And then let's check our stimulus payments. Okay, so we've visited several pages now on their website. Now to actually interact with the history API, I'm just going to clear this out. So this is just some warning I'm getting. I think it's due to my antivirus. So it's blocking something on this website. Kind of annoying, but I'm just going to clear that out. Now to actually retrieve the history object, just type in history and you'll see that it's going to autocomplete. And so if I just hit enter, whoops. There you go, hit enter. You'll see that this is our history object, right? And I'm just going to scroll up so it doesn't keep going down. And you'll notice that here we've got some data. So it's storing some kind of state. And we also got the actual path. So this is going to match up with the actual URL. And if we go under proto, I think under object here, nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Here we go. So under here, you could see that all the different methods that we have associated with this history object. So it looks like we have a go method. We've got a back method. I think you can guess what the back method does. We've got the forward method, push state, and replace state. So let's try these methods out. So if we want to navigate backwards one page, I can type in history.back and let's see what happens. There you go. Look, it took us back to the Dennis Miller page. So that's how we can use the history API to navigate. So if we want to move forward now, we can type in history.forward. And remember, you can only do forward if you've moved back at least once. If I hit forward, it took us back to the stimulus payment page. We can also see just how big our history object is by typing in history.length. Oh, it's not a function. We just want history.length. And you can see there's a length of 7. So we visit essentially 7 different pages or URLs. And so that's why our length is 7. Now we can also use the go method. So if I type in history.go, now we can pass in a value. Now this value is going to determine essentially the direction we want to move in. So if it's a negative value, it's going to go back a certain number of pages. If it's a positive value, it's going to go forward a number of pages. So if I type in -1, it's going to go back to the previous page, essentially, one page. So this is the equivalent of doing a dot back, right? So if I type that in, it goes back one page. And I can even go back 3 more pages if I hit this. And so that takes us back all the way back to Aaron Rodgers. And if I want to go forward, I can type in 4 and it's going to take us back to the stimulus payment page. So that's how we use the history API to move backwards and forwards. But now we need to actually get to the part where we can essentially create a new URL, right? And so the way we actually push something onto the history stack, push a new URL onto the history stack, is by doing history.push state. I'm going to do push state. And here, I tested this out obviously before I recorded, so you can see what I entered. But when you do push state, we got to pass in 3 values. So the first value is we pass in a object. And this can be any object with any kind of data, but this is just data that you may want to get passed to the new page that you want to load or the new URL. So you can technically leave this blank, but let's say we did want to give some data, like let's say the user is, I don't know, in dark mode. So dark mode is set to true, right? So we're going to pass this object to the new page, and the new page can do whatever they want with the data. They can just drop it if they want to, but we can just pass some kind of data in. That's all that matters. We can leave this blank if we want to as well, and that's probably what I'm going to do. The next thing we have to pass in is a title. We don't really use this, so just kind of leave that blank for now. And then lastly, we need to pass in what the new URL is going to be. So if we want to go to /Tom Brady, this is going to take us to twitter.com/Tom Brady. So let's hit enter and let's see what happens. Okay, so it looks like nothing happened on this page, but notice the URL at the top, right? We changed the URL to twitter.com/Tom Brady. If I do a history.length, you can see that we now have a length of 8. So we push something onto the stack. And so that's how we add a new URL onto the history stack. So in the previous section, we've actually been interacting with the history API without even knowing it. And that's what React Router is for. React Router uses the history API in the back end. So we never directly interacted with it, but React Router makes use of the history API. And that's really what all it's doing is that, if you recall when we worked with the React Router, we had like a link tag, right? Or a route. No. So we had like a link tag. And so when a user clicked on a link tag, guess what's happening? React Router, all it's doing is it's doing a history.push state and it's pushing in the new link. And then once we push the new link, we have the route tags that will look for the new link and then determine what components it wants to load. And that's really all that React Router is doing. There's one more method I want to cover with history. So if we do history let's do, instead of push state, let's do replace state. I'm going to show you what the difference is. So if I do replace state, I'm going to pass in an empty object. We're not really going to use that. pass in an empty title. And then finally, I'm going to pass in, let's just say gibberish, some kind of gibberish. Doesn't really matter what we're passing in. Okay. And so when I hit enter now, you notice I passed in the new URL, but if I type in history.length, notice that it's still 8, right? So what replace state does is it replaces the current URL in the stack with this new URL. And that's obviously different from push state, which, I mean, it keeps the old URL, but we just push a new URL onto the stack. So push state will increase the length of the history object. Replace state will not, because it's just replacing the current one. All right, so I mean, that's all we really have to cover when it comes to the history API. In the next video, we'll create like a little test React project, and I'll show you how we can use the history API to actually navigate users around, and not just by using a traditional link tag. And there's scenarios where you may want to do that, where maybe a user clicks a button, not necessarily a link, or some function gets called, and we want to, based off of different criterias in the current state of our application, load up a different URL. Well, we can do that by using the history API, and React Router provides us a way to do that. So I'll show you guys how to use that, and how to integrate React Router with all of this. All right, so I'll see you guys in the next video, and we'll get started on that. Okay, guys, so now that we understand how the history API works, I want to show you guys how the history API interacts with React as well as React Router. Okay, so what I have is an empty project. I've already deleted the source files, and so we're going to create a simple, it's not even a project, we're just going to create a little demo to kind of show you how to integrate the history API into your projects. So here I'm going to do source, and we're just going to create a new file. It's going to be our index.js file. We'll import React and then import React Router DOM, and we'll render our app component. So we'll do React DOM.render, and we'll define our app component in a second. All right, so we'll do new file and then make our app component. And let's open up our terminal, and let's just do, I know we're going to have to use React Router DOM, so let's just install that now. And we'll do an npm start. Well, let's make sure we save everything first. Oops, it looks like we have an error, so we need to make sure we import our app component. All right, so now we've got our empty application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a few routes for now. And basically, we're just going to make a simple guessing game where the user is going to be asked to input something. It's just some piece of text. And if it matches a specific keyword, then we're going to say they've won. That's it. Okay. And so we'll import React Router DOM, and I'll just do that automatically by going into our return statement here. Whoops. And we want to import browser router. And we'll wrap our entire application with that. Save that. And let's create our pages. So we're going to have one for our homepage. We'll have one for, we'll call this the game page. And then we'll have a winner page. Okay, so the home page will just have a link that will say if you want to play the game, go to the game page. And the game page will have the actual game. And if the user wins, we're going to navigate them to the winner page. Let's go back here and let's define a few routes. Okay, so make sure you import route from React Router DOM, and we'll say if the path equals, and we'll say just a slash, and we'll make sure to give it the exact attribute. Then we want to load the home component, the home page component. Okay, so let's import homepage. And I'm going to copy this 2 more times. And so we'll have a slash game. That's going to load the game page. And then finally, we'll have a winner. And that's going to be the winner page. Then let's just create some dummy content within each of these components. So we'll just say game page here. We'll say homepage. And then finally, this one's going to just say winner page. All right, so we've got all of our components set up now. Now let's just put in some data in our app component, or sorry, in our home component, so that the user can get to the game page. So here, how do we, now going back to our React Router section, how do we navigate a user from one page to another or from one URL to another? Well, we do that with a simple link tag. So I'm actually going to wrap this in an h1 tag, say homepage, and then we'll put in a link tag. So first we have to import it from React Router DOM, and we'll say to, and they want to go to the game page /game. We'll say, let's play a game. So this will create a link that a user can click on, and it's going to take him to the /game URL, which is going to load the game page. Let's hit save all, and let's take a look at our application. So we've got our home page. Notice our URL. So we're at the /URL. And then we've got, the link that says let's play game. So if I select this button, it takes us to the game page. So it looks like React Router automatically updates the URL for us. And the way it does that is by using the history API. So all along, since we've covered the React Router within this course, we have been working with the history API, except we haven't been touching it directly. Instead, React Router kind of abstracts all of that details away from us and handles that on the back end so that we don't have to. All right, so we know that we can update the URL by saying go by using a link tag, and when the user clicks that link, it'll update the URL to the designated URL that's assigned to the to attribute. All right, and so that's cool. However, you'll find that if you need to update the URL in certain situations, a link tag just won't be usable. And I'm going to give you an example of that, and I'm going to show you how we can more closely modify the URL and the history API. So let's build out our game application. And so here, this is just going to be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in H1, and this is going to say game page so that the user knows he's on the game page. And we want a simple input tag. And we also want a button. And so this is going to be a controlled input. So we want to make sure we put some state on that guy. So we'll do const, and we'll say guess, because it's going to represent the user's guess. And remember, to make this controlled, we're going to hard code the value to guess, and we're going to put a on change event handler. And we'll say pass in the event and say that set guess to e.target.value. All right, so let's give that a shot, and let's make sure we put some text on the button, some text on the button. So we'll do guess. Okay, and so we've got this. Let's just make sure that it's updating fine. All right, it looks like it's working. And so now what we want to do is when the user guesses a specific word, and we can pick any word. I'm going to pick chocolate. When they guess chocolate, it should take them to the winner page. If they guess wrong, then nothing should happen. So what we want to do is we want to put an on-click event handler. And we'll say handle guess. And we're going to define that real quick. So we'll do const handle guess. And we'll say that when he clicks this button, well, the first thing we want to do is if guess equals, and then our string is going to be chocolate. So if the user guesses that, then there you've won. And here we need to define what we want to do when the user guesses correctly. And so if we, what we want to do is we want to set the link to, instead of /game, we want to move them to /winner, and that's going to load the winner component. So how do we actually do that, right? Because the only way we know using React Router how to navigate between URLs is to specify a link tag. And so if we, how do we put in a link tag, right? Within a conditional like this? We can. So you might think, well, what happens if we wrap the button in a link tag? And I'm going to tell you that right now that's not going to work. And I think you know exactly why that's not going to work. So if we do 2 equals /winner, and then slap this button right in there, what do you think is going to happen, guys? Well, if I guess wrong, as soon as I click this button, right, it thinks I'm clicking on the link and it takes us to the winner page. That's not what we want to do, right? Because we only wanted to navigate to the winner URL when we guess chocolate. So this is not going to be an acceptable solution. So instead, what we have to do is we have to work with the history API. And we've learned, we can do that. So to access the history API, it's part of the window object, right? So if we go into our console again, and let me make this bigger for you guys, right? If I type in history, it's checking for any, parameters on the window object. So I can just type in history directly. However, that's the same thing as me typing in window.history, right? Because it belongs on the window object. So that's actually where it resides. So we can access it by typing window.history. What do we want to do? Push state, right? So that's how we push in a new URL onto the stack. And we got to pass in 3 things: an object. We don't really care about the data we're passing, so who cares? A title, we'll just leave that empty. And then finally, the URL we want to go to. So we want to go to /winner. Now let's hit save and let's give this a try. Well, we're already on the winner page. We want to go to the game page. Okay, so if I guess wrong, nothing happens. If I guess chocolate, let's see what happens. Okay, so we see that the URL updated, but we didn't load the winner page. Now, it could be that I made a typo, but I already know why this didn't work. And the reason why is we're accessing the history object directly, and we don't want to do that. Because we're using React Router, React Router wants to make sure that it's responsible for handling the history object. So it handles it on the back end and provides us a nice little API to work with it so that we don't have to touch it directly. So if we want to actually store a reference to the history object that the React Router has created for us, we actually have a special hook for that. And so we can do const, and we'll call this history. And I think it's called use history, right? Makes sense. So we'll import that. And we don't have to pass it in any parameters. And what I want to do is I just want to do a console.log. And let's just check out this history object. Right now we're on the winner page. We want to go back to the game page. Okay, and so let's take a look at the history object that it printed out. And hopefully you notice something. This doesn't look like the regular history API object, right? Because here we have a push method. But if you recall, for working with the history object, we usually had to do push state. And that doesn't seem to be here. I mean, we do have go back, but it was just called back on the regular history API. So this looks to be like a custom history object, which is kind of what it is. because React Router is kind of abstracting all of that and giving us nice, convenient methods to work with. And if we actually do a history, this is going to grab the actual history object. You'll see that this is the actual history object, and they both have the length of 6. So they seem to be related, but not really, because if I do a window.history.push state, nothing really happens when I move to that winner page. So we have to keep in mind that, we don't want to touch this history object. We only want to touch this history object, which is owned by React Router, and it's going to make sure that whenever the URL changes, it's going to make sure that the state of our application updates accordingly. So we're going to remove this. We don't need that. Instead, we're going to call and reference this history object. So I'll type in history dot, and then let's look at the different methods. So we probably want push. And here we don't need to pass in the 3 parameters. Instead, all we have to do is just pass in the new URL. So we want to go to winner. And I'm going to hit save. So now let's give this a shot. So if I type in chocolate, hit guess, let's see what happens. Look at that. It now takes us to the winner page. So that's how we operate or interact with the history API within a React and React Router application. Okay, so keep that in mind. Anytime you're working with React Router, make sure you use the history object that it's creating for us and you're not manipulating the history object directly.